Hello everyone, it is Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore, and welcome to the Music Masterclass. This is my weekly series I do on Thursdays where we talk about, making music. We talk about composing, arranging, playing by ear, improvising, all the things that are the creative act of making music. So what we're going to be doing today is wrapping up the project we've been working on for the last month of taking my brother Mike's song, Rise Up and Shine, and producing sheet music arrangement of it. All right. And by sheet music, we're talking about the piano, vocal, guitar kind of arrangements that you typically see in sheet music stores, which do they exist anymore? Yeah, there's a couple. There's like one left here in Denver because one of the other ones is just closing. Which is sad. But anyhow, sheet music, let's talk a little bit. I'm going to show you a couple pictures of some of the typical things that we're looking at, and then we'll take a look at the submissions that people have made of this and talk about the trade-offs, and then I'm going to show you my version of it as well. So let's first flip over to where I have a couple of different ones I want to show you here. I want to show you first a typical one. And by the way, excuse the noise. You know, y'all know that there's like this construction going on in my building and around my building, and right now it's in the building. So anyhow, if you hear drills and saws and things, that's what's going on. So this is a published piano, vocal, guitar arrangement of the Beatles, George Harrison's Here Comes the Sun. And so it gives you an idea of the kind of appearance that we are going for. So yeah, that's just a typical thing. And so it's got two staves at the beginning here because it's just piano with guitar chords over it, and then three staves later because it's got the melody on it. And well, I'm glad that you're not hearing the saws and drills because I am. So this is an example of one, and it's just one particular one I just clicked on because it showed up when I was just doing a search for, sheet music arrangements. Here is another one here. This is The Sound of Silence, Paul Simon. Right, so it's got the same basic look, right? There's a general look that these arrangements typically have. And that's what we are going for. However, there's another aspect to it. This is one of the arrangements specifically put out by the publisher, or Oregon Catholic Press, that this music is being submitted to. And it's being submitted to as a, what would you call it? It's a submission. It's what's audition. No, I'm not using the right word. It's, he's trying to get this accepted by the publisher for publication. And so this is what their music typically looks like. So it's a little bit different than what we just looked at. It's similar. It has the melody staff. It has the piano staff. And this is actually their piano accompaniment book. They put out a piano accompaniment book, and then they also put out a guitar accompaniment book. And the guitar accompaniment book just has the melody, lyrics, and chords, doesn't have the piano part. Notice it doesn't include fretboard diagrams. So that's one reason why I decided in my version I wasn't going to worry about them, because I know that they are not going to worry about them. They might have a key later on where they show all the chords or something. There's another curious thing that it's not that curious, it's common, and some of you might recognize this. In both the piano and the guitar version, we have this little bracket here at the beginning. A little bracket there, and then a little bracket 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 bars later, that closing bracket. Do y'all know what that is? Does anyone know what that's about? I have to confess that I don't remember seeing that in my years of playing and doing church bands and, other types of situations. I don't specifically ever remember seeing that until someone pointed it out maybe a year ago and asked how to do it in MuseScore. And then I discovered how, and then it came up again maybe a month or two ago, and I showed how to do it. It's basically, you can just add that as a character from the, from a font. So the question is, does anyone know what that bracket is? It's like this little corner bracket that shows up at the beginning of the piece, and then a matching one 8 bars later. So I'm waiting to see if someone gives me an answer, and then I'm going to tell you the answer. because it's something that happens in a lot of this type of music published for church groups and so forth. It doesn't tend to happen in these published arrangements that are sold in stores. So let's all right, since I don't have any answers yet, I will give you the answer. It's an intro. Notice that in the published version here of Here Comes the Sun, we have these 8 bars written out at the beginning, and that's the introduction, and it's written out for just piano. Does the Simon and Garfunkel one also have a short introduction? It's just right, it's just that one measure. So the introduction is written out. But in a lot of this church music, they don't do that, because part of it's that they're collecting all of this music into one songbook. They want to eliminate, reduce the number of page turns and so forth. And so rather than write out intros, we just sort of identify, oh, those 8 bars or those 4 bars or whatever will work as an introduction. So often they will just do that. So that's something you can do if you don't want to solve the intro problem. And so we'll look at what people did or didn't do for intros, and then we'll look at what I chose. Well, I already showed you what I chose to do, and I'm still not so sure I'm going to keep it. I might just go with the bracket solution. Anyhow, let's now take a look then at some people's versions of this. So, by the way, Mike may or may not be able to join us today. I don't know if you're here. Actually, I can look at the participants list and see. Mike, are you here? So let me just flip over, because before I do what I'm about to do, I do want to give him an opportunity to say, hey, I'm here. Yeah, he's probably not going to be making it, and I'm going to show you why. And this is related to remember last week when I was constantly checking my phone, waiting for an update. I was constantly checking my phone and waiting for an update. Mike has a son, Adam, who is my nephew, who is 26, 20-something years old. I have to think about that. Adam just had a baby, or he and his wife just had a baby. Mike is now a grandfather. There we go. This is Mike and Zaya. So anyhow, that's our big news, our big family news. I am now a great uncle. Mike is now a grandfather. So anyhow, between that and some other stuff going on there, he's pretty darn busy with other things, but he just wanted to pass along how amazingly appreciative he is of what we've been doing here, and he just wanted to pass that along. So thanks everyone from him. All right, so what I'm going to do here is now flip over to the window where I have different people's versions of things and talk about them. Okay, so Steiner has chosen to write out an introduction here, and it's cool. I want to listen to it. All right, there we go. So, and I'm gonna, as typically, I'm gonna focus on the chorus and then also take a look at things. And if people, while I'm looking at your particular things, if you have a particular thing you want to ask me about in a verse or a bridge, and it doesn't look like I'm gonna get to it, let me know. So, is everyone else frozen? No, I'm still live over here. So, Joanne, you might be having more internet problems. Not sure. So this looks great to me. I mean, the overall layout of the things. So we're going to talk about like details. And these are like really nitpicky details that we're going to talk about, as well as, some things about the music. So one detail has to do with the labeling of the staves. MuseScore by default is going to put in voice and piano, and then it's going to abbreviate it vo and piano. So this is maybe not what we want, right? If we look at a published, the version from Oregon Catholic Press, the top staff is labeled melody and the piano part is labeled keyboard, because they know full well it's probably an electric keyboard in the church band or perhaps an organ, right? So they're being generic and calling it organ. If we look at some of the PVG sheet music, though, there's no staff names at all, right? No staff names at all, because it's assumed. We know the format. We don't need to be told what these are for. So in any case, I would be fine with either of those alternatives personally, either labeling this melody and keyboard like Oregon Catholic Press does, or just leaving them unlabeled. There's nothing wrong with voice and piano, but we definitely don't need to continue to show the abbreviated names here. So in your own version of this, like my string quartet score, for instance, for the theme music, you can see it doesn't have abbreviated names here. And that's because if we go to staff part properties here, if I right click and go to staff part properties, we will find viola is the long name. The short instrument name is blank. I deleted it. And you can do that if it's showing up in your score, just click it and delete it. And that's all you have to do to get rid of those abbreviated names. So in large ensemble scores, we want these abbreviated names because that's going to help a conductor keep track of which which staff is which instrument. But when there's only two things going on, at most we'll want to see the names at the beginning, and then after that we don't need to see them. So we can totally just delete those. All right, so that's one detail. Now, one thing that I mentioned in one of my videos is the use of the word chorus here. And actually, if you look at their sheet music, I'm going to keep flipping around here, I'm sure, they use the word refrain. Let me just close that part. They put verses here, and then they put refrain here. So I'm using those terms in my own version and not chorus. Chorus and refrain basically mean the same thing. But if we do look at those, like here's that Simon Garfunkel version, it doesn't, or not version, but that song, it doesn't have any of those things, nor does Here Come the Sun. It doesn't say refrain. By the way, Here Comes the Sun. Here's a song that starts off, here comes the sun. That's basically the refrain that it starts with. So it's not the norm to start with a refrain or chorus, but that song kind of does, to the extent that it makes sense to talk about it in those terms. All right. So what else? All right. So we've been having a discussion about these things. Cases like this one here where we have shine, shine. Is that the right key? Shine, 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 shine. All right, so at least shine is a melisma, right? By the way, Bob, that thing about double clicking the staff name to get to staff part properties, yes, that is a good little tip there. Double click a staff name, and it will take you there. And you can also just click a staff name and press delete to remove it, as I mentioned before. So a good tip there. So these situations where you have melismas, I want to try to show you that this is that a lot of what's going on here is overthinking this. The word shine is a one-syllable word. Even when it's melisma, we typically write shine on the first note and then just extend the melisma line. We don't try to stretch it out if it is one syllable. Of course, if it's multiple syllables, you put the right syllable under the right note. But when it's one syllable with a melisma, it's pretty universal that we only do that once. So neither of those two songs happen to have melismas, which is unfortunate. I'm going to try to see if any of these, a lot of pop songs don't really do much melisma in their writing. The singer might do some stuff. Here we go. River, right? So this is John Denver, Take Me Home, Country Roads. And I'm looking to see if there's any examples of these one-syllable words with melisma. But yeah, you're going to want to take my word for it. You can read behind bars, right? The reference that I'm always pointing to when in doubt about something. But, there's looking at a reference book, and then there's actually looking at sheet music. And when you actually look at sheet music and look for examples of that specific situation, single syllable words that are stretched over multiple notes, it's pretty universally true that those single syllable words will just be written with a single, there's just no examples of a single syllable word that's a melisma here. It's just written as you put the whole word under the first note and then extend it with a melisma line. So that's just something you want to get in the habit of, especially if you're submitting it for publication, because you want it to look, as professional as possible. So just be aware that that's a thing. All right. Now, as far as the musically with this, I'll make a couple of other observations. One is that the placement of the accents there is probably overkill. In this kind of music, we don't typically put in a lot of articulations and so forth. There's an assumption in the world of pop music and related forms of music that the player is going to do his own personal interpretation, including things like reading from chord symbols and just totally creating their own part. But even when playing the written part, you will typically find not a ton of articulations. So to me, these articulations that are written in are probably more than needs to be there. If you do your job right of writing that rhythm, bum, ba, bum, boo, doo, bum, the syncopations create their own natural accents. The 1, 2, and for and. The fact that we have these notes on and that are not followed by a note on the beat, that creates that is the very definition of syncopation. A note on an offbeat, not followed by a note on the beat. So, or a note on a weak metric position, not followed by a note on the next strong metric position. That is the technical definition of syncopation. So, and I discussed that at some length in the basic theory course. So these have syncopations, and these syncopations, therefore, they kind of create their own accent. And so we don't need to write in the accent. So there's another thing about this. Now, the overall feel of this is nice. It's got a good flow to it. So the thing that I want to point out about this is it's got a flow, meaning like almost every eighth note is covered, which is what you want. You want something happening on every beat and or every half a beat so that there's a sense of flow in the music. Now, some music might not have that fast of a flow. It might have a quarter note flow or a half note flow, but whatever. Once you've established what your basic unit of pulse is, you want to be consistent with it. You don't have to have every single eighth note covered, but you have to realize that when there's an eighth note not being played, that's a thing. So this has got a nice flow there. I will say it's maybe a little bottom heavy. I have a rule of thumb that middle C, I've talked about C level before when I talk about chord voicings and keeping them somewhere near middle C, depending on what's going on. Either keep most of it below middle C or maybe most of it above middle C, but not too far above middle C, depending on whether you're also trying to get the melody in there, etc. But somewhere around middle C is where chord voicings work well. The left hand part can go as low as it wants, but if you're going to play a chord in the left hand, and by chord I really mean any two notes, don't give me two different notes lower than this C, C3, right? The C below middle C. You can play perfect fifths lower than that. You can play octaves all the way as low as you want, but don't play any other intervals. Don't give me this interval here. This is borderline. This is two notes, A and C, where one of them is right there on that C level line, and the other one's below. So this is the borderline situation where it's that's about as low as I would want to play a third. This E here is fine, but then when we get down here and we have F and A, it's pretty bottom heavy. Now you will definitely hear Beethoven doing that in his music and so forth. I mean, you will hear people, classical composers for piano writing heavy chords sometimes when they want that effect, right? Beethoven Pathetique starts right off with a big, heavy, dark minor chord, right? But he's going for very dramatic effect, and so he knows what he's doing in doing that. So that's something to watch out for, is not getting too many notes too low. Now, this is a very active left-hand part, and because it's an active piano part, meaning it's like the left hand is moving a lot, the left hand specifically is moving a lot, it's not simple to play, and it's not just one pattern over and over again. If it's a simple pattern, over and over, then you can be pretty active, just arpeggiating. But when you have to keep thinking about it and changing the pattern up like happens here, that complicates things. So, Stephen, that's a wonderful observation that maybe Beethoven's piano was not as heavy as ours. That's pretty brilliant. I don't know. I should know that. But I don't. So I mean, certainly the modern piano had pretty well started to solidify by his day, not by Bach's day. Bach did not write for a modern piano. But the instrument that Beethoven wrote for was definitely pianoforte as opposed to a harpsichord or, any of those other clavichords and other instruments. But how big the instrument would be, how long those strings were, and therefore how heavy, that's a good question. So yeah, maybe he wrote heavy chords to get a sound that on a modern piano doesn't need that. That's a really hats off. That was a great observation. Okay, so yeah, those are some of my observations about this particular piece. And I'm like, if I scroll ahead to try to find other measures, it looks like the website is not wanting to cooperate very well, but there we go. So his verse looks like it's got similar kinds of stuff. Oh, wow, he's got some really interesting stuff going on here. So this is really, interesting rhythmic things, that ascending bass line. That's really cool. It's not in the original, right? So it's a cool arrangement as far as that goes. What I'm aiming for is maybe something that's a little closer to the original. I'm not trying to mimic everything, but this is cool. That is a cool line, right? That's like, it's a really typical kind of rock, funk, etc. line. So anyhow, good stuff. So what I want to do now is move on, and we're just going to keep looking at other versions here. So this version here, oh, nuts. I can't see who it's from because I did the thing. I did the thing. Oh, this is Colleen's version. All right, perfect. So what I've discovered about MuseScore.com is if you make the window the right size, it gets rid of that sidebar, which is kind of cool. Oh, that's all I should have done, is just made the thing a little bigger. And this is like the way, if you find just the right size, that's how you can get the music to be the biggest. So Colleen's version, you have an intro waiting to be added later. You can certainly delete those measures if you don't want them. One notational thing I will point out, and this happens often, if you have notes in a measure and then you delete them or you start fiddling around with things, you end up with this situation that you see right here at the beginning. Notice how this rest is left aligned on the top staff, but the one on the bottom staff is centered in the measure, and same in the next measure. This centered rest is what you want in an empty measure. That means play a full measure of rest, or don't play, right? And whether it's 2/4, 3/4, 7/4, 13/4, a centered rest in the middle of a measure means the whole measure is empty. This one, where it's left aligned, that is a whole rest. That's exactly 4 beats. So you would only use the exactly 4 beats rest in measures that are longer than 4 beats. So if you wanted to say rest for 4 beats, then play, you would use that whole rest there. So basically, don't enter rests into 4/4. Just leave the measure blank. And if you end up accidentally getting that, just select that measure and press delete, and it will happily delete that rest and restore a measure rest in there. All right, so you've got a version here that's more quarter note focused here, as opposed to the 8th note focus that we just heard. slower tempo-wise, but we'll ignore that, right? Oh, I like those sixths. Okay, good. So this has got a really, this feels like a lot of sheet music. I mean, like sheet music arrangements that are written to be, especially to be simple to play. You know, there's like sometimes you'll have the same song put out in several different editions by the same publisher, you know, for easy, you know, beginning pianists, for intermediate pianists, etc. And I would say that this one is laid out really well for kind of beginning pianists or, you know, beginning, intermediate, whatever. It's nowhere near as hard to play as Steinhar's or with all the active activity there. And it's not just that it's less active, but it's much more consistent, right? Boom, 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 boom. Oh, I like that. 5-10. I've talked about that pattern before, right? The 5 and 10 pattern. So there's that. So there you go. And and I also see the comments about the organ, and that also has, you know, when you play something on organ, that's going to totally change also what's, you know, how muddy is different registers. So yeah, you definitely want to know the instrument that you're dealing with. All right. So yeah, the way you're doing that pattern and putting those the right hand hits on 2 and 4, really nice. And you know, you've of course got the jazzisms of having the sixths on the chords, the sixth there, and that's fine. I like that fine. So here again, this doesn't exactly resemble Mike's original version because it was more eighth note focused rather than quarter note focused and didn't have those sixths. But I think this is a really effective arrangement. In fact, the only thing in that chorus that at all wasn't what I was expecting. I love those sixths. It should have changed to a B flat minor chord there, right? This is where it changes to B flat minor, possibly B flat minor 6 there. So you want to just change that D to a D flat and change the chord symbol. But yeah, no, this worked really well. I want to hear your verse now. Oh, wow, that's cool. Ooh. Okay, you did that, right? That's not in the original, but that is super cool. Website, you can update the picture anytime now. Okay, let me go full screen again, since it seems to play better since it seems to display better that way. So yeah, you've done some cool reharmonization-y stuff in here. That is quite cool. So what's going on here is she's got the. It's really supposed to be an F chord here, by the way, and it's supposed to be 2 chords. No, 1 F chord and then a C chord, and then back to A minor. But she's given that A minor a secondary dominant, an E7, to lead back to that A minor. That's great. That is so cool. And again, not what Mike did, but it's hard to argue with a secondary dominant. If I were rearranging this, if I were reharmonizing this myself, I would absolutely do that sort of thing. So yeah, it should have, the F chord followed by C chord that you used in the first phrase is what the original had in the second phrase also, but that's a cool reharmonization. The other cool thing is that your left hand, of course, has this thing that I refer to as broken stride, and Colleen, you might know it by a different term. You might have, you know, I don't know what you might call that, but this idea that these left hand back and forth patterns like this, if you just go boom, chick, left, right, or, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4, bass chord, it gets old. And so the good stride pianists would break that up some and go chord, you know, I'm just playing random chords here. So this idea of breaking up those sorts of left hand to right hand patterns so it doesn't always have that march-like consistency like that is a really cool thing. And yeah, those chord voicings are definitely very Bill Evans-y chord voicings, but the particular way the rhythm is kind of broken up, where sometimes you have your bass note on 1, sometimes you have your bass note on on 3. You have the chord on 2 sometimes. Actually, you've got your chords on 2 and 4 mostly, so it's maybe a little more consistent than I'm thinking. But still, it definitely has a nice, fun, broken feel. So yeah, good stuff there. All right. I am going to, so yeah, if you have any particular questions you would want to ask about, let me know. I see at the beginning of your verse, you've got the remnants of voice 2 here, and that's sort of a MuseScore buglet, where if you start entering notes into voice 2, like you did at the very last measure of the chorus, you enter notes into voice 2, MuseScore gets one step ahead of you and puts a voice 2 rest in the next measure. Well, if you're not going to enter any notes into that next measure, you want to delete that rest. So just click that rest and delete it. So yeah, MuseScore gets one step ahead of you when you're entering notes into voice 2. That's, it's funny because that's been like a bug since MuseScore 2. And I think like everyone sees it and then we just get used to it and we don't do anything about it. But it's like one of those things that someone should just fix because it's probably like 2 lines of code somewhere to fix it. Anyhow, so yeah, but the same thing goes on here, like east to west. East is 1 syllable. Don't break it up like this. Yes, I know we put the consonant on the second note. East. The st doesn't show up until the second note, but that's just not how you write it. You write east on 1 note and then put the extender. Again, single syllables don't get split up like that. That's just the general rule, with the one exception that I'm familiar with that some publishers use, being the word fire. That fire is a 1-syllable word, but even when you say it, fire, it feels like 2 syllables. So that word and a couple others like that even when spoken feel like 2 syllables, you will see some publishers break them up like that. All right, I am going to move ahead now to Rod's version. And Rod, hopefully I have the right one. I know you posted a couple different ones, and I think this is the most recent one. You can let me know if it's not, but let's go ahead and hear. So also no intro here. Now you've got dynamics. Dynamics are cool. Dynamics are cool. So Colleen, yeah, I definitely wanted to get yours in before you would have to leave. So have fun. Okay, so I do want to just take a look at this and notice that the sheet music here has an MF at the beginning for Take Me Home, Country Roads, and then you really don't see any more dynamics after that. Simon and Garfunkel's song has a P at the beginning, and yeah, nothing else after that. Here Comes the Sun has an MF at the beginning and pretty much nothing after that. So what you'll see in a lot of these sheet music arrangements is that one dynamic at the beginning and maybe 1 or 2 somewhere else, but they definitely don't tend to micromanage dynamics. If you look at the Oregon Catholic Press chart here, there's no dynamics at all. And this doesn't mean don't play with dynamics. It, again, has everything to do with the sort of pop mentality of we're not just playing written notes, but we are providing our own interpretation. So the same reason why we add chord symbols, so we can create our own accompaniment, our own chord voicings, our own rhythms. Same reason we're stingy about articulations, because we know we can do those. We also typically are pretty stingy about using dynamics and so forth. So it's just sort of accepted that we don't need a lot of that. So I think my version, I had none, but I think you've just inspired me to add exactly 1. So I'm going to add 1 dynamic. Now, we don't need to do this micromanagement here of saying, oh, the voice is louder than the accompaniment. This is one of those things that's just going to be understood. So if, for the sake of MuseScore playback, you need the voice to be louder than the piano, just use the mixer to do that. But you don't need to do this business of explicitly writing in different dynamics just to say the melody should be louder than the accompaniment. That's another one of those things that's just sort of understood. All right, let's hear. Oh, nice. All right, I'm stopping here for a second because I want to talk about the chorus, then we'll take a quick look at the verse. So Rod also has decided to put an E7 in there, although, Rod, you don't have a G sharp, so you don't really have an E7. You have an E minor 7, so you might want to think about that. But the E7 going to the A minor would be super cool. So definitely, again, not in the original, so, you have to think about whether you want it there or not in the arrangement, but it's definitely a cool arrangement idea. Same comment about the staff names here. We don't really need these there, so you might want to delete them. And also, from the sake of submitting to a publisher or publishing it, we don't need the Roman numeral analysis. That's useful to you. But if now the final product is going to be, hey, this is the thing we actually turn in, we want to dump the Roman numeral analysis. Also, as far as those details go, the chord symbols go above the top staff, whatever that is. Let me flip back to the Don Denver here, and you'll see that when the piano intro is here, the chord symbols are above the piano staff, but as soon as the vocal staff comes in, then the chords move to the top of the vocal staff. Whatever staff is on top, that's where the chord symbols go. Someday MuseScore will probably have a feature to kind of automate that, so you can just put them in one place and it automatically figures out what's on top, like it does for rehearsal marks and other things like that. But right now you have to manage that yourself by just adding them to the staff you want. All right, so yeah, this also has a nice balance of it's basically an eighth note pulse as opposed to the more quarter note pulse that Colleen had going, but it's less busy. Right? It's less busy than Steinar's was, and it's probably simpler to play because really the only moving parts are just root 5 roots. Or they're simple arpeggios, and I see that you're keeping the use of the inversion on that G minor chord that you had going before, which again, that's totally cool. So I want to keep making the distinction of what's a good arrangement decision versus what's actually most appropriate for the purpose of submitting this to the publisher for Mike's song to represent how he originally presented it. I like that inversion a lot, but I'm not going to include it in mine because his was more root position focused. The only place actually where I make any allowance for that is in the verse. No, in the bridge. I can't remember how it goes. No. That's the place where he had the diminished chord. And then the bass went down to a C. That's the one specific place where he used an inversion, and I am going to honor that. Oh, also the minor chord, the minor 6th chord right here, the G minor 7 flat 5 with the D flat. He used that inversion. I keep that inversion also. So yeah, so I'm not going to introduce any additional inversions unless I feel like it's absolutely necessary pianistically, but I like that a lot. So anyhow, that's that. And I like how you broke up the rhythm in this 4th bar, right? You have, right? You went from the booba, from this. Right, you broke up the rhythm in that 4th bar there, and then similarly in the 4th bar of the next phrase. Right, bum, 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 bum. That's actually a little hard for me to play. Yeah, that's physically. There's no reason you would think that's hard, but these fingers don't like to play that repeated chord quite as well, and then have to bring my thumb down to the A while still repeating it. There's something that's a little physically awkward about that. it's not like super duper difficult, but it's like way more hard than I think you might think it is. So you might want to see if you can, because I love the fact that you've got that eighth note thing, because that's that twangy thing that Mike had going. So you want to hold on to the idea of that, but if you can thin it out at all, then yeah, that would be cool. And Bob, yeah, that idea that sometimes you want to put chord symbols on just the top staff and then have it automatically propagate to all parts, especially when you're not actually writing an arrangement, but are doing like a lead sheet and your parts are just different transpositions. Yeah, that would be a cool thing. Okay, so yeah, that's some of the observations in here. Now, this chord is also bottom heavy. One observation I'm going to make about that, remember when Beethoven started off like this, the hands were close together, and somehow that, I think, makes lemonade out of that lemon, of the bottom heavy chord. Well, let's balance it with more bottom heaviness and just say, hey, this is a low chord. There's something about this where the hands don't balance each other as well. Not that you never see this, but you do want to be careful about that. If you start pushing things at the low end, don't also push them with high notes. And so this chord here, the F triad, 2 octaves apart like that, is probably, it doesn't balance in my ears as well. And right now I'm hearing drills and power equipment, and it's really hard for me to hear subtle sorts of things. And Dave, yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that's what I would do. But it's also just these 2 fingers, the pinky and third finger, that I need to play those with. Just don't like to do that repeating thing so much at the tempo it need to be. By the way, you're missing the D flat, Rod, on the top staff. You've got the D flat on the bottom staff, but not on the top staff. And then also on beat 4, for some reason, it's not there, although that could be deliberate. So the overall feel of this, though, is really nice because it's got enough of the eighth note flow to convince me that we're dealing with an eighth note flow, but it's not overwhelming. It's not hard to play because it's so many notes or anything like that. So now just quickly going through. Getting a little dramatic there. Okay, so at this point, at first I thought that stop, that full stop that you have in that measure, was a sign of, oh, I'm going to do a dramatic stop, which is a thing. But now I'm thinking that maybe you're still working through this because some of the rest of this feels like, oh, there's just more stuff to add. So unless there's something in particular you want me to address about that, Rod, I will assume that we've kind of got the gist of what's going on, and that there, if something happens in the verse, that will be to be added later. So meanwhile, okay, good. Meanwhile, we're going to flip ahead to Linda and check out a little of her version. All right, good here too. So you've got that eighth note flow going well, and so that works well. So the same observation I made about staff names, but this is good. I'm glad this came up because this reminds me of something else that I hadn't really realized. When I did my demonstrations of this, I just used the default voice thing, which put a treble clef with an 8 below it, but it wasn't the real transposing 8. When I was doing mine, it was actually playing everything an octave higher. And then when I did the verse, I moved it down an octave because I was trying to put it in the right octave. And so I made some decisions in how I did the verse that turned out to be a little bit wrong because the voice I had entered in a different octave than the chorus. So when I show you mine in a little bit, I'll show you how I, just corrected that. So you've written this with a bass clef here, which would be totally correct if you were, writing specifically for male voice. The normal convention is, even when writing for, writing an arrangement of a pop song that was originally done by a male, we still put it in treble clef, and it's just assumed that men are going to sing it down an octave. And sometimes we put the little 8 in parentheses below the treble clef, and MuseScore's got one of those on the palettes to indicate that. But often in sheet music, in classical choral arrangements, or really any choral arrangement, the tenor part will be the treble clef with a little 8 below it. But in these pop sheet music versions, it's just a plain treble clef, and it's just assumed everyone will pick the octave that works for them best. So anyhow, so this version here has got that motion. It's got 8th note motion. And it's motion, it's arpeggiated motion. There's some consistency to what's going on. It's mostly 8th notes at the beginning of the measure and then slower motion later on in the measure, but it's not exactly the same pattern, right? Here we've got 6 8th notes followed by a quarter. Well, actually, let's look at where the melody starts. It's rise up, it's 6 8th notes and then nothing in the left hand, 3 8th notes and then a gap, then 2 8th notes and a quarter. So there's some variety in this, and variety is good in general. And if I was playing this myself, I would be inclined to put in that kind of variety. I will say, err on the side of consistency when putting in these sheet music arrangements. And here again, I'm going to flip over to Take Me Home Country Roads and notice that this pattern, it's got the melody wrapped up in the right hand there, because that's a thing when doing the sheet music arrangement often that we are specifically not doing, because we know we are doing a little more of the thing that's going on in this church accompaniment book, where the melody is hinted at in the piano part, but the piano part functions a little more independently. So that idea that we want to generally Sound of Silence has got that right, that guitar. Is it? No, it's not guitar. Whatever it is, it's that pattern, that right, that pattern kind of continuing, and so it's got this thing. But you see that right hand pattern, and then it keeps using that same pattern, and then here, a measure later, chord changes. Right, it's trying to take advantage of the inherent consistency. We get Here Comes the Sun. Left hand is just giving me 1 and 3 consistently, and right hand is just basically playing the melody. So you definitely want to be a little more consistent in the accompaniment when producing these kinds of arrangements than you might actually think is musically appropriate. Like if I was arranging this for performance and I wanted people to perform it directly from the arrangement, I would absolutely be putting in all these little variations to make it interesting. But I would say, I'm just like deciding to look over at the other computer to make sure I didn't like accidentally hang up again or something. Yeah, I just aim for a little more consistency from measure to measure for simplicity, and that's a good thing. There's also a funny thing going on here where you have C sharp twice. So once you've done the first C sharp, you don't need to enter the second C sharp. So if you just type C, it will make it a C sharp already. But now you can just click that C sharp and delete it. So that's something to think about. There's also something going on in the left hand rhythms here. You have 8th, 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 quarter. And if you go back and review in the basic theory course where I talk about the rules for notating rhythm, once 8th notes are involved, we really want to divide the measure into 2 halves and make sure that we can see each half independently. So the first 2 beats here would be 8th, 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 8th. We have to split that F quarter note that's showing up on the and of 2. We have to split it into an 8th note tied into an 8th note on beat 3, as if there was an imaginary bar line in there. So some of the rhythms here are a little harder to read than they otherwise would be, because you've got quite a few places. Because of that and of 2 thing, right? We knew we wanted that accent on and of 2, but if you write it as a quarter note, that means every time it happens, you're straddling that middle of the measure, and you don't want to do that. And yeah, Dave, that's a good comment about the distance between the hands. It's an effect, and you use that effect for effect, right? Use that effect when that's the effect you want, because it can have a very dramatic effect when you want it. But it's probably not something you want to do in one of these arrangements unless you're going for that very specific effect at, like, you know, the final chord of a verse leading into the chorus, where you're aiming for that kind of drama. All right. One other submission, and then we'll take a look at mine. So this is Graham's, and I've talked about this a little bit with respect to a couple things. This pattern is great, right? He's got the pattern, the rhythm going in his right hand here. Nice. All right, so Graham, that is lovely. I mean, I really like how that sounds. It's one of these ones that, again, in some ways doesn't remind me as much of Mike's version, in part because of the rhythmic character of it. There is a note on the end. There is this note, right? That note on the end of 2 is where it needs to be. Doom, doom. But then there should be another hit on 4 to imitate Mike's rhythm, and that's not there. Yours is on the end of 3. But it kind of needs to be on the end of 3, given your pattern, because otherwise there's a little too much space in that measure otherwise. And so I think by moving it to the end, by moving that hit on 4 to the end of 3, you've balanced this up a little bit more. There's other ways you could do this, but this is sparse, but really quite lovely. I will say that the sparseness of it reminds me more of verses than of choruses. Usually choruses are like when you get the whole band in and the drums in, and the verses are typically lighter. But it's a cool sound, especially because it starts right off with the chorus. And you might think about having a heavier chorus like later in the arrangement. That could be an effective, cool thing to do. One other thing is the pedal that you have written in there is great for MuseScore playback, but you'll notice that sheet music arrangements very rarely include indication of pedal. It's yet another one of these cases of pianists are assumed to know how to do that kind of stuff. We don't overdo the articulations. We don't overdo dynamics. There's a lot of things that we do that are on the assumption that pianists in this style kind of know to fill in these details. But to get the playback to be the way it should be, it's great that you've added these, but then you can just select them all and make them invisible. Right-click one, select similar, V makes them invisible. So, and by the way, Dave, in looking at your thing here, the Grieg, so this concerto, the dom jing that's that one, right? Notice, though, we don't hear the high note at the same time as the low chord. This high chord shows up, this chord way up here is at the same time as this. I don't remember the key signature of this, but both hands are up high. Then both hands are low. Then they're high. We don't have the high chord and the low chord at the same time in this fragment. I'm not saying it doesn't happen somewhere else, but that is something to be aware of, that I'm talking about the balancing of them at the same time to be careful about. So what you've got going on in your verse, Graham, is you've got the same kind of feel going on, but now changing up the rhythm, which again, I really love. I love the fact that you're doing something that feels consistent with how you treated the verse, with how you treated the chorus, and yet you're treating the rhythm a little differently by putting that hit on the and of 1, which is not where it was in the original, but it's cool. And also, of course, you're using inversions, and we talked about your use of inversions before, and they're very cool. I like them a lot. They're very effective. It's not what Mike does, and so it's probably not how I would want to present it to the publisher, but it's really nice. So everyone's kind of hearing, it's interesting that everyone's hearing some version of this like secondary dominant. You don't have that as an actual E7. You have it as an E minor 7, which, but yeah, everyone's feeling that chord there, which is so interesting. I guess so many of you have taken my harmony course. So anyhow, very cool. So yeah, I like what you've got going on here a lot. I think it worked really well on its own. So now what I'm going to do is finally flip over to my version, and so you can see where I'm at. I'm not necessarily 100% done, but I'm pretty happy with where it is, and mostly I think it's just going to need some fine, I just want to do a final proofreading pass. So what I want to do here is play through my version and take a look at it here. All right. So you've already seen a lot of this, or at least some of you have already seen in my demonstration, but I've cleaned up some stuff. You know, I've cleaned up some things based on how it was in my demo, and I can talk about things that are different about it. But here we go. Whoops. Let's play both staves. There's my intro. I'm just going to go on and let it play the verse. All right, so that's my version. I talked through a lot of the things that I did in the demonstration videos that I made for this. But yeah, this is the thing. One of the things I did do is after doing the verse and after doing the bridge, I felt like the chorus, I had it too high. Like my left hand, I went way up here, and everywhere else, like, because for the verse, I knew I was going to have to come down to this low A. I didn't know I was going to need to. I just did. And I thought, well, I could take that up an octave. But then in the verse, you know, if I took the verse up an octave, it was a little weird with the chord in here. And I didn't want the chord way up here. And that's when I realized I had the melody actually written an octave too low. But anyhow, the bottom line is I liked where I have the chords here and decided that basic depth was lacking. And when it would play the refrain, it would sound thin and hollow, and I didn't want that. As I mentioned with Graham's piece, I want the refrain or chorus to be kind of the big section. So all I did is change the left-hand octave of there from where I did in my demo. I think everything else I have about the refrain is how I demonstrated it. There's one change I made in my verse. It was this. It was a half note and then 4/8 notes. And as I would listen to it, I heard like that hole in beat 2, and it was bugging me. 1 and 2, 3 and 4. That 1 and 2 with nothing after it felt not right. So I wanted something on the end of 2, and yet I wanted the hit on 2 to be prominent. So 1 and 2, 1 and 2. Sorry, 1 and 2. I wanted to still be there, but 1 and 2. Bum, 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 bum. So I have something on the end of 2. It's just the start of an arpeggio. So it doesn't take away from the fact that I hit the left hand on 2. Now, at some level, it is just one big arpeggio, but because it's split between the hands the way it is, it's still going to have a subtle emphasis on 2, which is really all I needed. And I didn't even need that much. I just wanted it. And then those notes that I added on the end of 2, they're like the schwas that I talk about sometimes. They're ghost notes practically, I'm not even convinced I'm going to keep them. So anyhow, that's that. Let me just talk about the overall picture of how I ended up with it here also. I have my intro written out as 4 bars, which I could just do the bracket thing. Could totally do that, but yeah, I don't know. It works okay this way too. I have the word refrain there. I have the refrain with a repeat sign and then a close repeat at the end of the verse and a first and second ending for the verse, so that the first 2 times through you go to the verse, and then the third ending is the bridge, and then at the end of the bridge is a DS al coda, and that takes me back up to the top for the refrain, and then at the end of the refrain is the 2 coda, which goes into the that final out chorus. Because again, when you put this as a published arrangement, you want it to be a complete unit. You don't want to just say, well, this is a verse, this is a chorus, now figure it out. You definitely want to have a completed roadmap in a published arrangement like this. So I have the coda, and the coda is just copy and pasted from the original chorus. And it's got the repeated version. I didn't bother doing the hand clap thing, but that's that. Did I do anything particularly interesting? No, my bridge is also the same as the verse, basically. The one inversion in the whole piece, I think, other than that minor 6th chord. Yeah. So anyhow, that's my version. I will have the I will post the link to it in the community. I'll have it post. It's on musescore.com. I'll make it public and post the link so y'all can look at it. I'll do some final proofing on it and hand it off to Mike. So anyhow, I hope you all have enjoyed this project. It's been a lot of fun going through this and kind of looking at this music, talking it all through, and interesting about the video. I'm not sure what's up with that, but I don't know. It could just be internet connection stuff. So anyhow, again, thanks everyone. It's been a fun project. It's been great. Next week, we'll start talking about some, stuff having to do with accessibility and Braille music. But in Music Masterclass, we might just be looking at music, and we'll play it by ear. That is my plan here. So anyhow, thanks again to everyone who's been participating in this in any way, whether it's been just commenting here or submitting stuff or, just cheering along from the sidelines. It's been a good learning experience for all of us. I got to think about some things I haven't really had to think about before. So anyhow, I will see you all next time, and have a great week. And again, Mike, congratulations. Pops is his official grandfather nickname is Pops. So anyhow, thanks Pops, and thanks to all of you, and I will see you next time.